right, Tim Seymour, thank you so much for coming on. Alex and I are here in Austin, Texas. Our show is the Real Estate Podcast, but we're entrepreneurial and gravitating towards all kinds of business, and really appreciate your time, man.
It's great to be here, Matt. Thanks for having me, and Alex, great to meet you. And man, you're in a very cool town. I wish I could be hanging in Texas right now, and in Austin specifically, listening to some music and eating some barbecue. But I'm here in New York City, so what can I do?
Well, you guys are on another level there. We're excited. Austin's booming right now. The market's open. And so what we try to do on our show, if this is cool with you, is we try to add value for entrepreneurs. We want to promote anything that you have going on as well. But we'd like to kind of go through your career path and what you've done to get to the point that you're at today, and just ultimately just adding value for listeners. We get real estate brokers, investors, entrepreneurs, but would really appreciate to kind of run through your story as much as you feel comfortable with.
I'd love to. And I guess the context of understanding this is, first of all, for people that watch financial TV, they may have seen me on CNBC, which I've been on for the last 15 years talking about markets. And a lot of that has been on a show called Fast Money, which is kind of like the market wrap show, as in wrap-up show for the day. So it's almost like the NFL today. After the games are over, we're there talking about it. And the we are those of us that have been market participants for a long time. So I've been in the capital markets world for 25 plus years, and half of that I spent as a hedge fund manager and managing assets and investing and certainly looking at specific parts of that. And I'll talk about that in a second. But so I've been on CNBC for 15 years. I'm really fortunate to be in a position where we're out there trying to help investors understand market dynamics, give investment ideas, and hopefully tell the tale of what is always, it's fascinating times now. It's been there's been a number of really important and interesting times over the last 15 years, to say the least. So my background in financial markets and in finance is I spent probably, I came out of business school. I worked at UBS and went through their training program, and I was a bond trader. And ultimately, what was great about that foundation for me was that, especially I was trading what we then called, you guys weren't born yet, but G24 debt, which is essentially the sovereign debt, the government bond debt of all the major investment grade countries in the world. So that was all the European countries before the euro, and then the G7, G8, which really the G7, because that was not Russia. And it was not China, actually. So we're down to G6. But US, Canada, Japan, obviously, UK, and then all the European markets. But I bring that up just simply to say, understanding macro, understanding movements in currencies and rates, and some of those dynamics were really part of what I grew up in markets understanding. And from there, that really led me into the world of emerging markets. And because I think a lot of that trade, especially early in the days of the emerging markets as an asset class, as a place to invest alongside of global markets and high grade markets, but emerging markets are very macro driven. And I moved to Moscow in the fall of 1998 because I had an offer from a Russian investment bank who I had gotten to know. In fact, a former mentor of mine at UBS went out there to work and told me there's some really interesting things going on out here, and it's on the cutting edge, and et cetera, et cetera. This was after the wall fell. So I spent 7 years as a partner in a Russian investment bank, and a couple of years of that was in Moscow. The rest of that was back in the U.S., building out the U.S. branch and setting up really a small investment bank in the United States, where our specialty was Eastern Europe and Russia. And this was at a time when natural resources and commodities were really part of the reason why a lot of new investors were coming into emerging markets. And traditional big U.S. institutions that were investors in oil and gas and we're investors in nickel and copper and platinum and palladium and gold. Emerging markets are countries that are very rich in these resources. So, the progression then got me into just all of those trends on the investment side. And ultimately, I left to start a hedge fund in 2004 because we felt like we really had an edge, and we knew a lot about those markets. We knew a lot about emerging markets, and this was an asset class, again, that was getting a lot of attention because people understood that the demographics in a lot of these developing countries are so extraordinary, especially around consumer trends, size of the population, but really these are younger populations in many cases. Obviously, these are places that are growing very fast. So ran a long-short emerging markets hedge fund, actually 2 different funds over the course of about 12 years. And that was, a lot of what also put me in the position where they wanted me on CNBC to talk about my expertise in those markets. And then I started investing in cannabis, as this became, to me, a new emerging market, a new asset class that was evolving. And it really, to me, caught my attention in 2014, 2015. And by 2016, it was very clear to me what was happening and where I jumped in really with 2 feet. But the way I did that was first to be investing some of my own money, then that of my clients. And then when I started talking about cannabis as an asset class, and just my idea of that this was not this was not about a Cheech and Chong movie or Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I mean, this was really a consumer class concept that was evolving and emerging. And so I started just hearing from a lot of people in the industry because I was talking about those trends on TV, and ultimately just grew my relationships in the industry. And that meant getting to meet all of the top CEOs in the space, a lot of the top investors, and kind of moving from there. A couple years ago, I teamed up with Jason Wild at JW Asset Management because I thought this was the best team in the market from an investment perspective, and where I could bring kind of my skill set and my network. So we've been working together for the last 2 years on cannabis specific and the overall funds for JW. I also launched an ETF about 1.5 years ago. The ticker is CNBS, and it's an actively managed ETF in the cannabis space, which I think is critical based upon how quickly the industry is moving. It's an exciting time to be investing both thematically and actively as an ETF manager. But in the hedge fund side, we're doing private deals. We have public market hedge funds, and we're kind of really positioned across all these different product groups. So incredibly exciting time, and sorry for talking so long, but that's that's the background.
It's perfect. I actually have a quick question, and kind of diving into the emerging markets and cannabis, where I think maybe some of your focus is right now. Where do you think that your interest in cannabis as an emerging market and as an asset class, why is cannabis kind of fascinating as opposed to maybe other emerging markets or other asset classes? Because a lot of our viewers are real estate investors, and we make a lot of money investing in real estate, and we do well in real estate, and maybe are uninformed in cannabis as an asset class and as an emerging market.
So it's important to really hone in on what I think are the drivers for why people would want to be investing in cannabis, and some of them are exactly the same things that I saw in emerging markets. In the earlier part of the trade, and of course, people always talk about investments versus trades. Investments tend to be longer term focused. Trades sometimes are shorter term, and so this is an investment. And as far as I'm concerned, the evolution of cannabis as an asset class, leaving aside medical versus recreational or adult markets, leaving aside pharma, leaving aside obviously the efficacy dynamics within pharma, but the recreational consumption trends that existed and those that are evolving and changing. The point here really is that the macro trade was that we all are aware that legislation in this country, well noted in Canada, but around the world has changed dramatically as it relates to cannabis, or at least the wave of change in legislation is upon us, and we're very much in the middle. The perception of cannabis as a drug, from a medical perspective, as a consumer product, I think most importantly, because again, there's a lot of drugs and recreational dynamics that are effectively just consumer products, is where this is all going. And so back to emerging markets and cannabis. Some of the things that define new asset classes and emerging markets are the following. One is that these tend to be big thematic countries or ideas that are moving quickly and coming online, where in some sense it is a macro play. Investing in Russia or in Brazil in the late 90s was in many cases about investing in commodities, right, and investing in natural resources trade. But investing in India and China in many cases was really about investing in the demographics, certainly in India, where people wanted to be exposed to this next great big consumer class that was going to be buying the same products that the rest of the world was buying, where technology was going to leapfrog the dynamics that had moved very slowly but evolved in the developed world. In many cases, for example, in India, a lot of folks, their first phone was a mobile phone, right? Whereas at least when I grew up, we had fixed line phones, we had pay phones. The leapfrogging into emerging markets is part of why people are very excited about those markets. And obviously, again, the consumption trends, the size of the addressable market. So bring us into cannabis, where again, the macro is that legislation has changed. It's created this opportunity where clearly what was already a very large market, and a market that had existed for years, whether in the black market or those parts of the legal spectrum that did exist. The point is there's a huge addressable market, but more importantly, you're seeing a very fast adoption and a very fast evolution of cannabis, whether it be on the pharma side or the consumer side, from the consumption trends. But the sophistication of where this industry is, both, and I mean sophistication as it relates to the cultivation, the logistics, the distribution, the retail, the online, the DTC, the digital component of this. This is what makes cannabis really exciting, because this industry is very quickly growing fast at a time when those same dynamics are shaping the way people look at the entire retail space, right? I mean, we all are very well aware of how the retail world has changed in the form of all of those things, whether they be for traditional retailers, brick and mortar, online, e-commerce, where that's meant that a lot of people have failed and a lot of traditional methods have gone by the wayside. Cannabis is quickly setting up in a world with AI and DTC and big data and e-commerce and logistics and procurement and distribution chains and channels. So, I'm rambling, but anybody that's looked at these types of things before sees them taking place in cannabis. And this was obvious stuff to me. What's really exciting is the crossover perception changes and the crossover consumption changes that again, I think are part of where a lot of folks are really just gaining an awareness about what's going on with cannabis. And I think in many cases, there, of course, were perceptions that needed to be adjusted. Obviously, another big part of cannabis is the whole social justice, criminal justice dynamics, and what that's meant for certain demographic groups and certain social groups and ethnic groups. And I think that's part of this movement. And I think it's part of where I think people are very aware about these big trends, and where there's a sea of change that really encompasses all of these things. And so that's really, for me, why I love it. There's specific capital markets dynamics that I can explain as well that may not be as either interesting or concepts that a lot of the audience here spend a lot of time with. I don't blame them. But real estate investors and entrepreneurs certainly understand the evolution of markets as well, and where you can go from less liquid and inefficient markets to more liquid, deeper markets, and efficient markets. And cannabis, if you're 0 to 10 in terms of less liquid, inefficient, and fledgling to deep, efficient, and very sophisticated from a marketplace perspective, we're at 1.5. We're at 2 maybe in terms of the evolution here. So investors, entrepreneurs, and professionals in the real estate space who look at a lot of the same things I just talked about as driving asset prices in what they do and in their portfolios is exactly what we see here.
Yeah, that's good. And thanks for sharing all that. It's fascinating because I believe that cannabis has the most opportunity out of anything that I see. I mean, there's so much demand and it's been held down. And I agree with everything you said on the social justice side. And what's weird to me is we're here in Texas and Alex and I are talking to people like you, like Jason Wild, that are very sophisticated, savvy business people. And yet people have the perception here is still like, this is like a drug that's going to ruin your life. And so it's weird that we're having these conversations. Like we had one the other day and we're not even talking about that because our mind is so far past that.
Yeah.
There's people that are still thinking this way. But I appreciate you saying that. I want to maybe jump back a little bit as we're seeking to teach certain entrepreneurs and investors how people like yourself got to the position that you're at. When you were growing up, I mean, you obviously are seeking opportunities all the time. Like you moved to Moscow, you got into cannabis. Like, is that a common theme for you? Is like always kind of looking for something, testing things out, and I'm curious how that versus also your perception of like taking risks, because some of these things were probably very risky for you. Moscow, cannabis, kind of expound on that if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're right. I think anyone that's been successful understands the dynamic of taking risk, any kind of risk, many different types of risk, and measuring that against the reward. And so, for me, the move to Moscow was, I thought, relatively simple professionally. Emerging markets, these new asset classes, these new markets were a lot bigger in terms of the opportunity for a younger person in the Wall Street world, being a U.S. Treasury bond trader or salesman, or corporate bonds, or even selling high-grade equities. Again, very sophisticated and very highly developed markets. But moving to Moscow to me was an opportunity to have a much bigger opportunity.
So it was obvious opportunity similar to cannabis space. It's just obvious when you kind of look into it and understand what's going on.
Yeah, and there was some risks for me professionally 5 years ago, talking about cannabis, talking about it on CNBC, right? I was a guy who spent a career trying to build a reputation, hopefully as a reasonably talented markets guy. And the perceptions that have existed around cannabis, at least in many cases, have been highly negative. And so, yeah, there was a risk in talking about this. But to me, again, the opportunity of seeing not only to that point where I started really diving into the sector and talking about it, there already was the beginning of a major perception change. But I think a little bit of education goes a long way. Look, the reality of the world we live in is that whether they are through prescription drugs or recreational drugs, or over-the-counter products, and
obviously spirits and alcohol, people are medicating themselves, and consumer products that are 60% of what people walk into Walgreens for are use cases for cannabis or THC or cannabinoids. And there's been such little research because, frankly, federally, it's been illegal to actually even explore some of these things. Clearly, for
for many years, there have been users, and there's been a very big market here, and people that have made their own choices. But I think taking a chance on cannabis, the biggest issue is taking a chance on what people's perceptions are about where this drug has deleterious effects on society.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's changed. And I think that's the most important dynamic of where risk and reward is here too, because that's been at the root. Legislative changes sometimes are result of just pragmatic dynamics, which is that, hey, look, if cannabis can plug a budget hole in a state that's going through a difficult time fiscally, why not? Oh, and by the way, it just so happens that slowly over time, 65% of the population in that state are in favor of legalization, no matter what side of the aisle they're from.
Yeah.
So, I think that's part of assessing the risk reward.
And I love having a debate with somebody about this, because there's so many things that you can fall back on. It's hard to see anyone have reasons why this shouldn't move forward unless they're just having these wrong assumptions. And so what you said, when you said education goes a long way, I think that's the key. I mean, it's do you understand the people are in jail? So many, it's an easy debate for me to have on why it should be legal. I've never heard many arguments and I try to be really open-minded with everything, but I've never heard anyone convince me almost any logical reason why this shouldn't move forward.
Yeah. Again, the education process is something that exists at a different pace and at different levels for different people. But there are some basic tenets about cannabis that I think are just wrong, misperceptions. I mean, it's not a gateway drug. It's no one's ever died of lethality. There's no lethality dynamic of consuming cannabis. Whereas fortunately our country is very aware of an opioid addiction and crisis that is emanating from some of the biggest institutions in the world, and conceivably with the consent of them. So, the nice thing about cannabis is it's forcing a rethink on a lot of social dynamics, including what people were sent to jail for and who those people were. Look, any substance, there's a lot of debate around drugs, and there certainly should be a very important distinction between adult markets that are restricted to youth. So to be really clear about that, but the other real important thing about the cannabis dynamic is this is an industry that wants consistency and regulation and safety and predictability. And these are all the things that you want in the consumer products you consume every single day. And it's exactly where this is going. If it's not, it's already there. And now it's just going to be fine tuning. But I think that those are really important dynamics, and you're not going to convince everybody. But look, there's a lot of people that rightly point out the dangerous effects of alcohol on society, and that's a real debate that's a lot easier to fight, possibly. But as you get into the human condition, that ultimately behavioral issues are throughout society. Everybody deals differently. Some people do a better job of making adjustments, and some people don't.
Well, I loved what you touched on one of your shows. You said 5 guys in a room drinking, start a fight. 5 guys smoke a joint, start a band. It's so true. And I'm curious, like right now for you moving forward with your career, I'd love to, it's kind of a 2-part deal. You said you play to your strengths and understand what you've done throughout your career to figure out what your strengths are and to develop those. Because I know you have the emerging market, but then also the, CNBC side where you're talking and presenting yourself. I really enjoyed the video that you did with Acreage and Canopy where you were interviewing all three people. I just thought you did a really good job. So kind of curious, like
Thanks.
what you've done on the strength sides, and then moving forward. I mean, you're looking for
Well, look,
cannabis opportunities.
yeah, I'm happy to kind of tie this all together and just say that my strengths are that I'm an investor and an institutional investor and a capital markets professional, and I know how capital markets run. I know how institutions invest. I know how high net worth and family offices invest. And ultimately, I want to be building out the most sophisticated, legitimate platform for investing in cannabis, which is in the very early stages of investment. And I and we, so again, my partners at JW, and even my partners on the ETF side, I want to be, we want to be building the best platforms that give investors not only the greatest opportunity to this incredible investment opportunity, but also do it in a way that's transparent and legitimate and thorough, with obvious all the necessary regulatory backdrop that financial professionals need to operate under. We want to be the institutional investment choice for cannabis because we're guys that have done it before in other asset classes, and we were early in cannabis. I mean, that's who we are. That's what we want to be, and I'm excited by that because we're in the very early stages. This feels like living in Russia in the late 90s and building capital markets. It's nice to feel like you're part of something. I think the industry has a conscience. I think there's a lot of great people working in the industry, a lot of really smart people. And those are people that have grown up in the industry, and those are people obviously that have come from outside of the industry and brought that expertise from lateral industries. And that's again on the investment side, and it's also on the company side. I mean, we're not in 2.0 C-suite in cannabis. We're like at 3.0, at least for the companies that are executing, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, man, it is, and it's really cool to see JW and put $20 million into Gage and do the deal with TerraSen. I'm like, man, you guys are everywhere, and all the moves that are being made. I'm like, they're behind a lot of different aspects of cannabis. So that's really cool to hear that. Well, that's the goal, is to keep building that and to do it legitimate. And it's something that people, I mean, it's like I said, in Texas, like people don't think there's a legitimate cannabis investment opportunity and that aren't really educated on this stuff.
Well, guess what? We think there's a very legitimate investment opportunity in Texas in cannabis, and it's going to happen. It's happening. And so it's just we focus on the best opportunities that we think are there, whether we're planning for those opportunities to really unfold in 2 months or 2 years. It's why people ask us, are you investing in cannabis in Europe? And the answer is not really, because we're in the biggest marketplace in the world. It doesn't mean that we're turning a blind eye to it. And in fact, there are a lot of companies that either we're invested with or we know or we're tracking that are connected to that opportunity. But look, it will change. It's all I can tell you. I think that the dynamic of where people are looking past preconceptions, but understanding, both whether you're truly believe that cannabis might be helping people in terms of how they address pain or how they address issues with medication, or where it addresses issues for the job creation and the fiscal dynamic and the predictability and the safety of putting it in the right hands and taking it away from the illicit hands and the bad hands. I mean, those are things that eventually, and this isn't, Texas is a monster in terms of a state that's rich of not only economic, cultural, and landmass opportunities and history, but I mean, Texas is its own market, right? So in some sense, and I am sure that it's it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, it's obvious. And that's one of our big goals is to try and somehow be in front of that in Texas because we care about this industry. We want to get plugged in with guys like you, figure out ways to add value and somehow be a part of that in tech. Because we're focused here. We got real estate going on and we know that we can add value, but it's just a matter of time. So we try to keep these conversations going and getting advice from people like you is big. And hearing that is cool as well. So appreciate you saying that.
Well, again, as real estate investors, and it's a pleasure to have been here today, Matt and Alex. And when you're investing in real estate, and you guys know this better than I do, you are investing in macro and big thematic dynamics and secular trends that you see coming. And obviously you see that regionally, but you're also investing in the bottom up, right? It's this wonderful mix of blending having vision, investing and longer horizon investing for sure, in many cases. But it only works if it's married with the proper bottom up kind of consumer consumption dynamics that ultimately make those things work. So I think there's a lot of crossover, and this has been a really interesting conversation for me.
Great. Well, we really appreciate you coming on, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. And hopefully, in a few years or sooner than that, we're talking about cannabis in Texas.
Hey, real quick before you get out of here, what are ways that people can maybe get involved to be a part of what you're doing? We want to support that, and we believe in what you're doing as well. Like, how can people become part of this fund or reach out? Like, what's the best way to do that?
Great. So look, I think if people are interested in investing on the hedge fund side with us at JW Asset, info at jwasset.com is going to work. Or they should reach out to you and you can get in touch with us. And then on the ETF side, you can go into your Schwab or E-Trade account and the ticker is CNBS, like cannabis. And it allows you to get a position on in a thematic basket. So I mean that invest with us on the hedge fund side, or invest with us on the ETF side, or just do your work, do your research, because there's a lot of people out there talking about different things, and there's a lot of opportunities, but there's also I think there are people that may be promising more than either they're in a position to deliver or may not always have their facts right. So be careful.
Yeah, it's Wild West, and to get teamed up with the right people is great. So we appreciate what you do, man, and keep doing your thing and pushing this forward. And I know you got a lot going on, so thanks a lot for coming on our show. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. All right.